With the brand new set of alien transformations introduced to us in Alien Force, we got a whole brand new roster of interesting and new aliens with more complex abilities. And with that we got our new big strong guy and series staple in Humungousaur, the only alien that could rival Forearms when it comes to Ben's favoritism. And not just Ben, but I, along with most everyone else, loved Humungousaur as an addition to the Omnitrix. He felt like he could do everything Forearms could do, but bigger and better. He felt like a nice in-between between Forearms and Way Big, quite literally sizing-wise, particularly when he used his secondary ability to increase his size and strength further for any given situation. He really felt like a great answer to any particularly large villains or monsters of the week. You were no longer dwarfed by villains like Vilgax, you could meet him at his size or even larger. Well, at least that was the case in Alien Force. We'll get to how he was handled in later appearances towards the end of this video. But despite my love for Humungousaur, I can see people potentially feeling like he overstayed his welcome a bit. Having 80 odd appearances across Alien Force, Ultimate Alien and Omniverse, though we'll get to those shortly. Now for me personally, as I said, I adore this transformation. Humungousaur manages to carry this massive weight with him, more so in Ultimate Alien and Alien Force more than he did in later iterations, though I do know people really celebrate his reboot design. I'm personally a fan of what I've seen, but I haven't seen a lot of the reboot. Especially in his earlier days, he felt like an absolute monster. Ben had his own dinosaur transformation to use at the drop of a hat. He goes toe-to-toe with enormous hybrid, he can hold up collapsing structures, and he's an absolute treat when it comes to any action set piece. Not to mention how imposing this transformation is. It was a real highlight seeing Ben use that size as a form of intimidation against the young Forever Knight Squire during Benighted. What Humungousaur is for me is a more exaggerated, more monstrous Forearms. He's larger than life, towering over most every other transformation. He really feels like he can throw his weight around too. His action set pieces are always really interesting despite having a pretty straightforward power set, and like Forearms, has a particularly distinctive monstrous voice. But for me, one of the biggest things is the way Humungousaur moves around is so engaging to watch. When the moment lends itself to this sort of tone, and it really often does in Alien Force, Ben as Humungousaur feels like a larger-than-life monster. There's this great balance between his movements feeling cumbersome due to his sort of sheer size, while at the same time being able to use that size to do some serious damage. I also find that these larger, more ferocious feeling aliens lend themselves well to both the more dramatic elements of the shows and the comedic ones, without ever feeling like one aspect takes away from the other in the end. Their enormous presence either adds to the seriousness of situations or is a fun little juxtaposition against a sillier mannerism or interaction, Humungousaur being the prime example, but I still think this applies to sort of a Forearms or a Way Big. As far as any standout moments go, his fight against Ultimate Aggregor is probably the most standout moment to me. I mean, I use these clips in just about every video I can insert them to. Even with access to an alternate form, Ben is in too much of a hurry to hit Aggregor that he goes straight in for the kill. And a scene I hadn't revisited in some time but was reminded of watching Elizonia's video on Humungousaur. When Ben as Humungousaur goes up against the Plumber's Helpers, seeing Ben use this literal monster up against hybrids of some of his former aliens like Manny, Helen, Alan and Pierce, making them all feel like near non-factors up against this new powerhouse of an alien. These alien hybrids feel like they're trapped in a monster movie. Obviously Ben playing it up here, but there's something so effective to this. And just to be really succinct, I just think Alien Force in this scene did such a great job of making Humungousaur feel like more of a threat than a Forearms, an Accelerate, or a Heat Blast, even if that isn't necessarily always the case. Just tonally, they really nailed that. A small side tangent before we move on. I have such vivid memories of the first and only time I played the Alien Force video game on my friend's Nintendo Wii. Being stunned that we got an Alien Force game in the first place, loading into one of the earlier areas, transforming into Humungousaur and proceeding to somehow clip my way through the ground, and end up in this sort of no-textured purgatory with no way out. Come to think of it, I don't think I ever picked that game back up again after that. Not particularly relevant to this video, but it was Humungousaur adjacent nonetheless. Back to prime examples of Humungousaur throughout the series though. His brief appearance in his fight against Darkstar and Darkstar Rising was really great. His fights against Hybrid generally were always a highlight, and an absolute series staple for me and one of my favourite scenes in any iteration of Ben 10, Ultimate Humungousaur up against an army of bioid Humungousaurs. And speaking of Ultimate Humungousaur, let's get into what is for me simultaneously the highest and lowest point for Humungousaur in the franchise. With the addition of the Ultimatrix and the subsequent Ultimate forms came the series mascot with Ultimate Humungousaur. Whether you're a fan of this design or not, it's hard to deny the impact it had on the franchise. Being used in just about every piece of promotional material for the show out there, as well as being the first Ultimate form we're introduced to. I adore the look for this transformation, the new colour palette, that helmet, the shell with those spikes, as well as the clubbed tail. I just love every aspect of it. It was perfect down to the last minute detail. I'm even a fan of the missile launching hands. As goofy of a concept as that is, I visually found it really appealing. And with the addition of that new out there ability, we get to the point of this part where I say it's the lowest point. Humungousaur loses his ability to change his size. As far as memorable moments go, I quite enjoyed his fight against Edwasia, as well as the sentient Humungousaur taking control of Ben. But more than any of that, I loved the return of Ultimate Humungousaur come Omniverse with that brand new design, taking everything that worked in that old design and exaggerating it, adjusting what didn't work and exaggerating what did. And speaking of Omniverse, let's really get into the issue I have here. Now, that humongous problem I've been meaning to get to comes pretty simply with what happened to the series staple come Omniverse. With the completed Omnitrix and the series that at its core is a celebration of all the things that came before it, comes the decline of a series staple. From a design standpoint, I think the more action cartoony look of Alien Force better lended itself to a more serious look for Humungousaur. The more cartoonish proportions of Omniverse sort of lessened the weight that came with the original design. I think in particular, Humungousaur's larger forearms and hands, along with the more top-heavy build, make him feel more cartoony and less grounded in reality. That and his little outfit doesn't feel entirely necessary for his species, though you do settle into the crossbody sash and the undies when watching the show. Looking at the still of the character makes him feel a bit silly. Before we move on, I would like to credit the Heroes United iteration of Humungousaur for being the standout version of this design. That little chest detail and the more serious tweaks really make this version shine to me. But back to Omniverse and the real issue here, he doesn't grow. After Ultimate Alien, where we get the ultimate form of Humungousaur as the series mascot, I understand we as viewers have gotten accustomed to an Ultimate Humungousaur not growing, but when we're out of the Ultimate era and we return to our standard issue Humungousaur, you'd expect him to use the ability we've seen him use time and time again, especially when faced with what I did really like about Omniverse's handling of the species with their species predator. There's something about his species predator Tyrannopede that so perfectly carries through that sort of dinosaur aesthetic from Humungousaur onto their species predator in a way that feels sort of cohesive with the universe at large. Of course, the dinosaur transformation's predator is an even bigger, scarier dinosaur. But back to my point, why would you as a species dwarfed by your predator species not use your ability to grow to become, if nothing else, a bit harder for them to eat? I suppose there's a logical argument that using their ability to grow would make them a larger target, but if so, maybe make a note of that, or even better, show us that as an audience. Have Ben make that mistake and learn from it. Maybe the reason Ben never grew as Humungousaur after coming across the species predator a few times was out of instinct. After developing a habit of feeling danger when around that species predator knowing not to grow, maybe it didn't occur to him growing was an option in other situations from that point. Earlier in this video, I mentioned growing as their secondary ability with strength being their primary one. I'd like to quickly address that. I suppose strength is more of an inherent ability that comes with enormous size, while their ability to grow is more comparable to the way Heat Blast produces flames or Big Chill becomes intangible. In a way, removing Humungousaur's ability to grow is like taking away Big Chill's intangibility or Heat Blast's flames. Besides that, Humungousaur goes through a lot of the same growing pains as other aliens went through come Omniverse. Aliens that lended themselves to having a more serious tone or ones that thrive with a more sleek design, again like with Big Chill, had their designs adjusted come Omniverse, making them more cartoonish, and with that more exaggerated art style also comes a more cartoonish direction for the most part. Individual aliens in Omniverse, for the most part, are given less emphasis on their capability, with the exception of newly unlocked transformations. It's not a bad thing by any means, given that the new transformations like Feedback, Atomics, or Vampire now get time to shine in their debut series. It's just that a lot of transformations, even an extremely prominent one like Humungousaur, takes a bit of a backseat when it comes to making room for these new species. Though despite all of that, due to Omniverse's absolutely gorgeous fighting choreography, even with the impact he once had, it's a real delight seeing any fight involving Humungousaur. Even without that same weight behind him, without his ability to grow, they're still so enjoyable. To wrap this up in a nice little bow, Humungousaur falls into a category of Omnitrix aliens that has plenty of other transformations in it. He's one of the big strong guys of the series, with that big being relative to which series you're referring to. And that sort of categorizing of transformations is something that can be said for a lot of Ben 10 aliens. A lot of transformations fill the same roles as others, think the countless electric ones. Or in this instance, the seemingly endless big strong guy aliens. When it comes to raw physical strength, Humungousaur is definitely up there, but he's by no means the strongest out there. He sits there somewhere in between Way Big and Forearms, two transformations that on their own nicely differentiate from one another. Despite how capable Way Big is, there's a lot of instances where Forearms would be better suited. I mentioned Humungousaur taking Forearms' place earlier in this video as a sort of bigger, stronger iteration of the strong guy of the Alien Force playlist. Not to say he is inherently more capable than Forearms, but it's Situation specific. Forums felt like a much better combatant. Despite being pretty sizable himself, he felt like a pretty agile fighter. He has the upper hand by being more general athlete and less strongman. While Humungousaur feels stronger and certainly makes use of that, what sets him apart is his ability to grow. And having that taken away from him was a bit of a blow to this transformation generally. I found there tends to be a bit of a dislike for Humungousaur out there, and while I understand his overuse can be frustrating, I've got a real soft spot for him. If you have any thoughts or feelings on anything I've said or Humungousaur generally, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, thanks for watching.